Was Boris Johnson acting irresponsibly by suggesting that the proposed changes to housing benefit would result in Kosovo-style social cleansing?
Kosovo-style social cleansing, and it was, of course, Chris Bryant who first used the word cleansing, sociologically cleansing London by the changes. Chris Bryant, was Boris Johnson being irresponsible? Were you being irresponsible?
Well, obviously, by definition, I wasn't being irresponsible.
What definition would that be?
My own.
All right.
But I think Boris went a little too far. I don't think nobody's talking about ethnic cleansing here. But there's a very serious point, which is that I think that the changes to the rules on housing benefit, whereby if you've lost your job and after a year you're still out of work, you will have 10% of your housing benefit cut, whether your rent has changed or not. In certain areas of the country, there'll be a cap, which will mean that you may, through no fault of your own, have lost your job, and then you're not able to meet the bills and you have to leave your home. And I think that what that will do is that it will mean that certain parts of our inner cities, of our big metropolitan areas, which historically have been a mix of rich and poor, will end up having the poor moved out of them. And it'll be like Paris, where all the poor live on the outer ring. And I just don't think that's the kind of country I want to live in. I think it's unfair. I think it means that the burden of the economic situation that we are in is falling on those who are most vulnerable.
Yeah, that's your view on the policy. The word cleanse, though, which Nick Clegg took exception to, does suggest, doesn't it, that you were thinking of the way that people, Muslims and Serbs, were moved around in Bosnia, Kosovo, what happened there.
I think it's a kind of social engineering. I think it is a...
Cleansing?
Yes, I think it is social cleansing, because it's exactly what the Conservatives tried to do in Westminster Council so many years ago. It was declared illegal when they did it then, and now they're trying to do it deliberately again.
Deliberately. So it's not a matter of the policy about the cost of housing, it's a matter of actually the coalition government trying to clear people out of the centre of London. That's what you're saying.
I think what they're trying to do is they're trying to say that, in a sense, they're pandering to Daily Mail front pages, and I think that always leads to bad politics.
All right, Ed Davey.
I think Chris and Boris Johnson should apologise. I think the language they're using is appalling. I think it's misleading, and I think it's scaremongering, and worst of all, their analysis is completely wrong. And I'll tell you why it's appalling. I have Kosovan asylum seekers in my constituency who really were ethnically cleansed. And they are angry when they see ministers and the Mayor of London using that sort of language. They know what it's like to be cleansed, and what is being proposed is nothing of the sort. So you should use temperate language, and we should have a grown-up and adult debate.
So why is it that your own statistics say that 900,000 people will be affected?
When we have that grown-up adult debate, people will find that there are 790,000 social homes in London that will be completely unaffected. They will find that the vast majority of housing benefit recipients across the country will be unaffected. And yes, there will be some, but we've increased massively the fund that will assist if there are problems to £140 million. And even those people who will be affected, they will be able to find up to a third of private sector rented homes in London still affordable under housing benefit. Now, I'm afraid you are being factually wrong. I'm afraid you're the one who's pandering to people's sentiment when we are actually putting a sensible policy.
Davey, you've just... Hold on, no, not 1 second. You've asked him to apologise. You've asked Boris Johnson to apologise. You're a Liberal Democrat in this coalition. As far as I know, no Conservative has asked Boris Johnson to apologise. The Prime Minister hasn't, should he?
Well, I think Boris Johnson began an apology when he corrected his statement earlier on this afternoon. And I think he may be beginning to realise that the real issue here is we are proposing, after all these changes, that the state will still subsidise up to £20,000 a year rent in the private sector.
Yeah, but that's the policy. Hang on a second,
That's £400 a week. There are a vast majority of people who work in Glasgow, in my constituency, who would love to be given £400 a week to subsidise their housing.
No, but Ed, you can't get away with that because you're going to cut everybody's benefit by 10%. Anybody who is unemployed, who is in receipt of housing benefit, and for that matter, the people who are working who receive housing benefit, because 500,000 people do, you are going to cut it automatically by 10%. Why? Right, it's unfair.
Wait, don't go into the statistics. The point is that what Boris Johnson said, and what you said, which put heat into this debate, was this was a deliberate attempt, and I use the verb again, to cleanse the centre of the inner city.
And that's
now,
completely wrong.
All right, is it government? Is the government, in your view, should the government ask Boris Johnson to apologise? Is that what you want?
I think Boris Johnson is beginning to apologise. I'd like him
He's
to be
not
more
beginning to
forthright.
apologise. I'm sorry I said it. Boris Johnson hasn't apologised.
He's had to correct his statement.
He
You know
didn't
that,
correct
David.
his statement.
Well,
he said, on my watch, there will be no Kosovo-style cleansing, and he hasn't withdrawn that.
Well, I think he should.
All right, and you think that the Prime Minister should ask him to?
I wouldn't be surprised if he's already done that.
Asked him to do it?
I wouldn't be surprised if he's already asked him, because I think it's completely wrong.
Do you know that?
I don't know. The Prime Minister is representing the country in a debate about the EU budget, which no doubt we'll get onto. But I do think we need to deal with the facts.
All right.
When you look at the facts, you will find that the vast majority of housing benefit recipients will not be affected.
Simon Sharp, was Boris Johnson acting irresponsibly by this suggestion? That's the point.
Why would we in our right minds think Boris would ever act responsibly, really? I mean, you know, it's famous for his... And he says, oh, you know, my remarks were taken terribly out of context. What context would that be, Boris? Well, it isn't exactly the Nazi deportation of Jews from Poland, but it could be like Kosovo. No, it's awful, it's disgusting. You know, sainted George Orwell really would be frowning and spitting balls of furious fire right in Boris Johnson's eye. There is the issue, quite apart from the strong issue of equity and fairness about the cuts, of which this is a very important emblematic moment. There is the issue of the debasement of language. It happens, not with you, of course, David, on the news. It happens in movies. I hate it, for example, I hate it when the Tea Party in the United States refers to Obama delivering, whatever you think of Barack Obama's policy, America into a gulag. That is an obscene offence to anybody who actually knows anything about the history of the Soviet Union at all. So words are weapons. They have moral valency. Even though we don't expect Boris to sort of necessarily articulate with the discretion for which he's usually famous, we do occasionally need, this is hilarious coming from Sharma, isn't it, to be careful how we speak.
Man in the second row of the back, yes.
Yes, I'm deeply worried about the direction in which this debate has gone. It's been reduced into some kind of juvenile argument about throwing insults. We're talking yesterday when David Cameron responded to questions in the House of Commons. He gave these crazy figures on people gaining 30, 40, 50,000 pounds a year in housing benefit. Those are hypothetical examples. If they exist, they're extremely unusual. The housing benefit cuts that are being proposed by the government will affect not just people paying very high rents in central London, they will affect people across the whole of the United Kingdom. The whole of the United Kingdom. There are proposals that will affect ordinary people living ordinary lives, paying ordinary rents, and there are more of them who are in work than are claiming job seekers' allowance. I think we need some honesty in this debate.
Right. Hugh Hendry.
Honesty. Honestly, I was surprised that you could claim £20,000 or £30,000 or £40,000. I'd like to know the figures. I'd like to know how many people, how many households today are receiving 40 or 50,000. Do you remember that's the rental equivalent of a property valued at £500,000. So we have families, and your money, my money, right? It's coming out of our pockets, and we're giving it to them. We're saying, tough luck, enjoy the TV tonight. You know, the house is on us for life. We can't afford that, and I think it's insane, and we're all so busy. So I welcome actually this week, because we're so busy, caught up in our jobs and our careers and looking after the kids, that we don't realise how crazy and insane and out of control the system is. And quite frankly, again, like Simon says, who cares about Boris Johnson?
Nicholas. A crazy, insane system, Nicola Sturgeon.
I've got a lot of concern about the housing benefit changes, and I'll come back to that in a second. The question was about the language of Boris Johnson and Chris Bryan, indeed. I do find the language regrettable. Yes, because it is an insult to people who have experienced the horror of ethnic cleansing, but also, and this is where I agree with the gentleman at the back, because it diverts us from the real issue. Here we are tonight talking about the language that Boris Johnson has used when we should be talking about a very serious issue. And it is a serious issue that will affect thousands of people in Scotland. Now, Ed Davey says it will affect hardly anybody, but he's only talking about the cap of £400 per week. Our rents in Scotland are not that high. There's less than 10 families in Scotland will be affected by the cap. But when you take all of the housing benefit changes together, 97% of housing benefit claimants will be worse off to the tune of, on average, £10 per week. And they're not all the feckless, workless people that the coalition like to talk about.
But Hugh Hendry says the money's wasted anyway.
Well, limited 25% of them. Well, I don't agree with them. I'm making my own point. 25% of these people are in work and on low pay. These changes will drive up homelessness, which I think is a scandal, and they are characteristic of what the Tories, and I have to say shamefully, the Liberals are doing, which is focusing their efforts in reducing the deficit on the most vulnerable in our society. Do you know they're raising more to pay off the deficit by cutting benefits for the disabled than they are in the bank tax? That is absolutely shameful, and it's wrong.
Ed Davey.
The real issue here is the state of social housing in Britain today. Under the Labour government, we had a 50% increase in the numbers waiting on the council house waiting list. We saw an affordable housing crisis. We saw a net reduction in the number of social houses. Now, Nicola and Chris won't tell you this, but in the spending review, we made provision for an increase, a net increase, in social housing of 150,000 new homes for people who really need them. Now, that is a policy which Labour failed to deliver in all its time in government. And unless we deal with the real issues in the housing sector, and the housing benefit and the problems with it is a symptom of the underlying causes of house prices that have got out of control, of a planning system that hasn't been dealt with properly, of high rents. And what is really bizarre is Nicola and Chris are supporting a system.
No, I'm not.
You're supporting a system of housing benefit. Let me finish. And where does that housing benefit end up? It ends up in the pockets of very rich, wealthy landlords who've pushed up rents. And we have got to tackle this.
Ed, honestly, don't try to pretend that this is a progressive move. You're cutting the housing budget from £8.8 billion over 3 years to £4.4 billion over 4 years. You're cutting the amount that individuals will have, whether they are in work and receiving housing benefit or out of work because they've lost their job because you've put 490,000 people out of work, by 10% at the end of the year for no reason other than your own ideological desires. Don't pretend you're being
ideological desires to save money, or what are these ideological desires?
Well,
because it's to cut the deficit.
Well,
is that not one of your desires?
Before the general election, the Liberal Democrats said passionately that they felt that it would be wrong to cut too deep and too fast. They didn't want to do what the Conservatives were saying, and now they're going further than that. So I think there's a little bit of cutting corners here with the truth.
You, sir.
Yeah, the net reduction in social housing was due to the Thatcher era, when you sold off all the social housing.
And you, sir,
my idea is that we're going to go back to the black and white world of Cathy come home, when the rich get richer and the poor get poorer.
The rich are going to get richer and the poor poorer.
Because we're going back to Cathy goes come home.
Yes.
Just very briefly.
Well, Liberal Democrats pushed for the capital gains tax on the wealthy to go up. It's gone up. This government has introduced a banker's levy, which the last government failed to do. This government is taking child benefit away from the higher rate taxpayers. These are measures which mean that the highest decile, the 10% of the richest people, will pay significantly more as a result of the budget and the spending.
And increasing VAT so that the poorest will pay more. You are not a progressive government.
And taking the lowest paid out of income tax altogether.
We've had a quarter of an hour on this. We must move on.
very much indeed. Welcome to the big questions from King Edward VI School, Southampton. I'm Nicky Campbell. This week, the bishops in the House of Lords battled against the government's welfare reforms and lost. But they haven't given up their fight. Our first big question, is it right to cap benefits? The Bishop of Southampton says it's going to hurt many vulnerable children. Tomorrow, Elizabeth II will have been our Queen for 60 years, and as a young woman of just 25, she also became Supreme Governor of the Church of England. But today's Britain is a more multicultural society with people of many more faiths and none than in 1952. So our next big question, should a future monarch cease to be Supreme Governor of the Church of England? Muslim Mohammed Ansar says the next monarch should have freedom of faith and not be tied to the Anglican Communion. On Wednesday, the steady 40-year decline of selection by academic ability in the English education system was quietly put into reverse. Existing grammar schools are now allowed to increase their intake of pupils, provided they are in areas of rising population. Should we expand grammar school education? The journalist Peter Hitchens says Britain's future depends on them being allowed to expand limitlessly and everywhere. Welcome everybody to this morning's big question. Well, in an open letter to the Observer, 18 Church of England bishops expressed their concern that a cap on benefits could push some of the most vulnerable children in the country into severe poverty. Yet many working people take home far less than $26,000 a year to support their families. Is it right to cap benefits? It is absolutely such a moral issue, this, and both sides of the argument argue just that. Caroline Dinenage, a Conservative MP, you believe that it is immoral that some families are working their backsides off, as you put it, and taking home less than families doing nothing.
Yeah, I really do, because I represent a part of England which is not typical of what people would regard as the sort of leafy, affluent south of England. We have an area where people are on low average wages, very low job density, less than half a job per working adult in the Gosport Peninsula, and people having to out-commute every day some distance, incidentally the biggest town in Britain without a railway, to get to work where they are earning less and enjoy a lower standard of living than neighbours of theirs that might be living off of benefits.
And that's a real case of fairness in your mind, isn't it?
I think that's fundamentally unfair, that people who are doing the right thing and desperately striving to support their family should be penalised for doing so.
What do you mean by doing the right thing? What about those people on benefits? Are they not doing the right thing? Are they doing the wrong thing?
Well, I think that everybody aspires to want to work. Nobody wants to remain on benefits. And clearly, you know, for everybody that wants to work and they can't, it's a tragedy for that family. And I think the longer you remain on benefits, the more demoralising it is, the less likely you are to want to have the self-confidence to go out and get that job. But I think fundamentally, people do want to work to support their families and feel that they are contributing to society.
And you're worried about the children of the working poor?
The children of the working poor, yeah.
What about the children of those on benefits, the vulnerable 220,000 children who will suffer? Bishop Jonathan, tell her about your concerns.
Well, I mean, I think there are some common areas of agreement here that welfare reform bill has important contributions to make. We welcome, as a House of Bishops, we welcome its universalism, its readiness to tackle some really critical issues. But I think the concern of the bishops is when you drill down and ask different questions, not so much comparing, is it fair, for people to get £26,000 for doing nothing, and here you are working terribly hard. That's an attractive argument, but it's rather beside the point when 67,000 households are going to be affected by the welfare reform bill. 220,000 of the children in there are part of those households. And quite disturbingly, I think, research has shown 4 out of 10 disabled children live in poverty. The impact, which I'm not sure has been aired enough, the impact of the proposed welfare reform bill would see 100,000 disabled children lose £1,400 a year if the bill goes through unamended.
It's quite clear that the benefit is not taken away from families who've got members with disabilities. That's quite clear. And also, I defy anybody not to be able to live on what is effectively a salary of £35,000 a year. It's a huge amount of money.
But £500 a week may sound sufficient just looking at it cold and neat. But if you're in the centre of London or in parts of the southeast, rent, basic bills, leaves you very little out of that. And I believe that unamended, the Welfare Reform Bill raises real issues of fairness towards the poorest in our society.
Why are the children of the people on welfare benefits more worthy of our care than the children of the working poor?
I don't think I would want to set it in that way. I think that's the temptation, to set it in that way. When the Prime Minister presented the policy, I'm troubled by the image of him.
Well, the working poor,
so.
just sorry to interrupt, the working poor get benefit. These people,
yeah,
by very dint of where they are in the welfare system, will not get child benefit.
£3,000 a year.
Simon, you wanted to come in.
When it comes into what we're subsidising, of course, we could debate how the government uses taxpayers' money to subsidise the arms industry, and all sorts of other things, which I notice you roll your eyes at.
Creating jobs for members of our
in proportion to the amount of subsidy, it's creating very few jobs, especially as they're being moved
Not in
overseas.
the gospel area.
But on the specific question of the Welfare Reform Bill, if this cap was doing what the government said it would, I wouldn't have that much of a problem with it. Once we look at the detail, we find that the issue of disability is far less clear. We find it also applies not only to unemployed families, but to part-time workers. If you're working 23 hours a week, your benefits will still be capped at the same amount, which means if you're unemployed...
These are housing benefit tax credits and also council tax benefit.
If you're unemployed and you're offered a part-time job, it won't be in your interest to take
Peter
it.
Hitchens.
There's actually a disincentive to
Peter
work.
Hitchens, does it concern you, the 220,000 vulnerable children who will suffer, apparently?
Well, I'm always suspicious when people start talking about children in these instances. It's usually a sign of propaganda.
That's from those figures from the Children's Society.
If people are running households, then it's up to them, provided there's enough money in the household to feed and clothe the children, to put the children first. And for propagandists to say, children will do this, children will do that, it's always child poverty. And also in the middle of this, there's discussions of poverty. There is no poverty in this country by comparison with what, as the Bishop particularly must well know, goes on in Africa or Asia. We do not have people who actually cannot afford to eat, have no shelter, freeze to death, have no access to medical benefit. Hang on a second. What puzzles me about the Bishop is that he and his colleagues on the bench seem to have mistaken the welfare state for the kingdom of heaven. I don't know quite why they are so wedded to a particular socialist view of policy that they think that supporting the taxation of the poor to put money into the hands of often people who don't, or in some cases won't work, is in some way a Christian principle. As far as I recall, St. Paul said, he that doth not work, neither shall he eat. And the Church is quite rightly concerned with the support of widows and orphans and people who really and truly need assistance. But it should not be concerned with creating a huge welfare-dependent class of people who don't work.
Of course, I'm grateful for the quick theological lesson, but
any time. I often feel that bishops
just
need them.
Well, I think Jesus said he'd come to give good news to the poor, and that we were to love our neighbour, and so it's not propaganda to speak up for the vulnerable. And
you're a Christian, Peter, and the Bible is full of instructions to help the poor and those less fortunate.
And so we should. But that is completely different from setting up a society in which people are paid not to work, and also a society, I have to say, in which we have deliberately created, and this is something the Church should really be against, because the Church depends upon marriage above all things, a society which has deliberately created hundreds of thousands of fatherless families in which the children suffer endlessly from not having a father in the home. That's something.
Carol, let's get Carol in, and there's lots of hands going up in the audience. I'll come to you, sir, in a minute. I saw your hand shoot up about 5 minutes ago, Carol. Are there people who genuinely, in this country, can't be bothered working?
I don't think it's about can't be bothered working. I think there are people who are born into families where there's been generational unemployment, and that is a problem of aspiration. Often they're cited in low educational and attainment areas because nobody wants to work there, and the teachers don't want to go there because actually it's really hard. I don't think... I've never met anyone who said to me, when I was younger, I know what I'm going to be. I'm going to live on benefit. I'm not going to have a car, I'm not going to have a holiday, and I'm also going to be demonised by a state that has deserving and undeserving.
Are you worried about the language here, the undeserving poor, the deserving poor, the working poor?
The hard-working families. I just... It's,
well, there are hard-working families.
There absolutely are. And interestingly enough, the universal credit will hit 680,000 DW figures, households, and they'll lose money as well. And they're low and middle income earners. So it isn't, you know, we focus on the people on benefit. Now, the real issue about the benefit problem and the real spend is housing benefit. And a lot's been made of very big, you know, people living in very posh places. That's about people, private sector landlords, charging exorbitant rents. Where are these people going to go? Where are they going to be relocated to when the average person loses £83 a week?
Mohammed, in a minute, I know you're on this.
I agree about housing benefit. Housing benefit is a consequence of the crazy decision to sell off all the council houses, which I think is one of the biggest mistakes that we ever made. It doesn't alter the problem, but the cost of supporting this welfare state does not come out of the pockets of bankers and millionaires. It comes out of the pockets of the next-door neighbours of these people who are actually going out to work. And they are often taking home less than the people they're subsidising. This cannot conceivably be right.
OK, a lady there, yeah. Good morning.
Good morning. How about personal accountability? And that is laid at the hands of parents, not children. Parents should not have children or even animals they cannot support.
So if you can't afford, you should not go forth and multiply.
You must take account of your own income, your own abilities, and only parent children you feel you can give a good life to.
You didn't like it, but the look in your face, sir, you didn't like that, did you?
No, I don't like that, and I feel really quite cross that actually we talk about the fact that there's no poverty in this country. I live and work in a deprived estate in Southampton. I see poverty every day. I see children sleeping on beds we wouldn't let our dogs sleep on. I see mums going hungry to feed their children because they can't afford to live on the money that they're given. Yes, they're on benefit. Most of them can't get a job in the area that we live in. It's almost impossible to get a job. And I really take offence that someone says that poverty doesn't exist in this country.
Or the slums of Bombay and see how people live there, and perhaps take any of these people who in this country complain that they're poor and take them there and show them what poverty actually is. What we do have in this country is a huge moral poverty, which the bishops ought to be addressing, of people having absolutely no,
I'm sorry,
no moral
can I come back to you
surrounded by crime and disorder.